When you think of St. Petersburg, Russia, one of the first images that probably pops into your head is this one, the famous Bronze Horseman, right? It's this incredible tribute to the city's founder, Peter the Great. But here's the thing. Its greatest secret, the most mind-blowing part of its story, isn't about the writer at all. Nope, it's about what he's standing on. I mean, what if the most impressive part of this whole thing isn't the bronze statue, but the giant rock it's on? Because that pedestal, well, that's the single largest stone ever moved by human hands. And the story of how they did it, it's this forgotten masterpiece of engineering that, honestly, it just sounds impossible.
So let's dive into that. Our story starts not with an engineer's blueprint, but actually with a political power move from a very, very ambitious empress. You see, we have Catherine the Great. Now, she was a German empress ruling Russia, and she really needed to cement her legitimacy, to make her rule feel solid. So she came up with this brilliant plan. She'd commission a massive, unforgettable monument to Peter the Great, the ultimate Russian hero. By doing that, she could literally set her legacy in stone, linking her reign directly to his. Okay, so the political goal is set. Now for the artistic challenge. For this, Catherine turned to a French sculptor named Étienne Falconet, and let me tell you, his vision was every bit as ambitious as hers. Back then, statues of kings and emperors were, well, kind of boring. They were all pretty much the same. You know the look? Some guy in armor looking all calm and serious, sitting on a horse that's just standing there. They were all about military power. But Falconet, he was like, no, we're doing something totally different.
Yeah, Falconet completely rejected the idea of just showing Peter the Great as another military commander. He actually said, and I quote, he wanted to show him as a creator, legislator, and benefactor of his country. He wasn't interested in a statue that just stood still. He wanted to capture action, energy, the very idea of creation. So his design is just dripping with symbolism. You've got the horse rearing up on the edge of a cliff. That's all the challenges Peter had to overcome. And see the snake it's trampling? That represents his enemies. But the absolute key to his whole vision, the real game changer, was the pedestal. It couldn't be some polished, neat, man-made block. No way. Falconet insisted it had to be one single, massive, wild rock, almost like a giant wave, to show Russia rising up as a major sea power. So Falconet's idea was artistically brilliant, totally revolutionary, but it also created a logistical nightmare. I mean, a problem that seemed completely and utterly impossible to solve back in the 18th century. Seriously, just stop and think about that for a second. Where do you even begin to look for a single piece of granite that big? And, okay, let's say you get lucky and find one. How in the world are you supposed to move it? We're talking about a rock that was estimated to weigh 1,500 tons. To put that in perspective, that's like trying to move 10 blue whales at once. And remember, this is an era with no engines, no cranes, no heavy machinery whatsoever, just human and animal power. So they searched everywhere, and finally, in 1768, a peasant comes forward and says he found a stone of a terrible size, half buried in a marsh about 6 kilometers from the sea. It was perfect. They nicknamed it the Thunderstone, and Falconet knew this was it. This was his wild rock. Just one tiny problem. It was stuck in the middle of a swamp 6 kilometers from the nearest major waterway. And what happened next is, without a doubt, one of the most incredible engineering achievements of the entire pre-industrial world. Forget the statue for a minute. The journey of the Thunderstone is the real story. Okay, so get this. The whole journey took almost 2 years. And that first part, the overland trek, just 6 kilometers, remember, that alone took a brutal 9 months. The solution they came up with was just genius. First, they had to wait for winter, so the marsh would freeze solid. Then, they laid down a track of wooden rails. And here's the brilliant part. They placed 5-inch bronze balls between the rails and a metal sledge holding the stone. They basically invented a giant primitive ball-bearing system. Then they got 400 men pulling ropes attached to these huge winches called capstans, and to make sure everyone pulled at the exact same time, a drummer would beat out a rhythm. Incredible. But man, the progress was painfully slow. On a really good day, they might move it 200 meters. But the average was more like 150 meters a day. Think about that. All of that brain power, all of that manpower,
to move this thing less than 2 football fields.
So, after 9 long months, they finally make it to the Gulf of Finland. Whew. But their problems were not over. Not by a long shot. Now they had a whole new issue. There wasn't a ship in the entire world that could carry a 1,500-ton rock. They'd conquered the land. Now they had to figure out the water.
So what do? Well, if the ship you need doesn't exist, you build it. They constructed this massive, custom barge. Then they sailed it into shallow water and sank it. On purpose. They flooded it until it sat right on the seabed. Then they managed to drag the Thunderstone onto the deck of this sunken ship, sealed it up, and started pumping all the water out. And just like that, the natural force of buoyancy lifted the barge and its impossible cargo right up to the surface. It was a technique that was literally centuries ahead of its time.
Let's just recap the numbers here because they're insane. One rock, 1,500 tons, moved 6 kilometers over a frozen swamp. It took 400 men 9 months to do it, using basically just ball bearings and the principles of buoyancy. It's no wonder this feat is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest stone ever moved by humans.
So, the stone finally makes it to St. Petersburg, the statue gets finished, and it's unveiled to the public. But the story's not quite over. There's one last really interesting twist, and it involves Russia's most famous poet. So here's a little riddle for you. The statue is made of bronze, right? And we all call it the Bronze Horseman. But in Russian, its name is Medny Всадник, which literally translates to the Copper Horseman. So, what's up with that? Why the different metals? Well, the answer is a guy named Alexander Pushkin. In 1833, he wrote this epic, super famous poem called, you guessed it, The Copper Horseman. And this poem became so huge, so important to Russian culture, that its title just stuck. It became the statue's permanent nickname. So even though the statue is technically bronze, which, is an alloy made mostly of copper anyway, the name from Pushkin's poem is the one that everyone uses. Back then, people didn't really make a huge distinction between pure copper and bronze in everyday talk, so the poet's powerful words basically renamed a national monument. And when the monument was finally unveiled in 1782, the inscription on it brought everything right back to the beginning. It's simple, direct. It reads, "To Peter I from Catherine II." And just like that, her political goal from over a decade before was quite literally set in stone. So the next time you see a picture of this amazing statue, do me a favor. Look past the horseman for a second and really look at that rock. It's more than just a pedestal. It's proof of what's possible with a little bit of human ingenuity, teamwork, and just a flat-out refusal to accept that something is impossible. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are we building right now that will still make people stop and stare in awe 250 years from today?